You need to move, sir. This seat is for someone important. He didn't argue. He didn't move. He just smiled, because the country they were flying to was his. The weather was grim over Frankfurt that morning. Gray clouds smudged the terminal windows like fingerprints, casting a dull haze over gate C-45. Travelers shuffled past, dragging roller bags and clutching paper cups, too tired to care who was sitting where or why. All except one man. He sat quietly by the window, hood up, posture relaxed, fingers moving slowly over a weathered book. No briefcase, no suit, no watch, just presence. Quiet, unreadable presence. Ibrahim Traoré had flown countless times, but never like this. No diplomatic badge, no press, no security detail. Not even a jacket with the crest of state. He wanted to be seen as just another African man boarding a flight back to West Africa. Except, this wasn't just any trip. It was a mission. 3 months earlier, his office received a classified internal report. Rising complaints of racial profiling and mistreatment of African travelers across major European airports. No headlines, no outrage, just quiet shame. Some were told to stand back, others were reassigned seats, denied upgrades, ignored when they asked for water. It wasn't enough to speak out. Not yet. So, Ibrahim chose to walk into the system himself. Not as a president, as a passenger. The flight today was with Western Sky Airlines, Flight 379, from Frankfurt to Kudugu. A 3-hour trip, uneventful on paper. But it carried more weight than any summit he had attended. Across the aisle in 4F sat Amira Cole, Director of Strategic Communications for the Burkinabe government. She wore a neutral gray turtleneck and black glasses, blending in easily with the crowd of NGO workers and consultants flying south. She had been briefed. Her role wasn't to protect, it was to witness. In her leather tote sat a portable lens, a secondary mic, a digital relay device linked directly to the presidential media unit. 1 touch would activate the silent recorders, 2 would flag security at destination. Amira didn't speak unless necessary, but she saw everything. Boarding began late. Gate agents called rows without urgency. And then came a shift in rhythm, just a ripple at first. A man in a sharp blue suit, sunglasses tucked into his collar, stepped to the counter. He was surrounded by assistants, one carrying a monogrammed laptop bag, another with a sleek flight dossier. His name, Douglas Harrington, CEO of Enerset Global, an energy giant once entrenched in Burkina Faso's cobalt sector. Until last year, when the Traore administration had stripped their licenses for shady practices and fiscal irregularities. Harrington had not forgotten. And neither had Ibrahim. Harrington was headed back to negotiate, though some in his circle called it reclaiming what's ours. But now there was a problem. The business class cabin was full. The gate staff murmured, searched, scanned. That's when Selena Marsh, the lead flight attendant, stepped into the picture. She was a veteran in the skies, tall, pristine, eyes trained to size up worth in a blink. She wore her confidence like armor and had little patience for inconvenience. "Make room," Harrington had said, not as a request but a command. Selena nodded. She knew how to handle this kind of pressure. Minutes later, inside the aircraft, she walked down the aisle with practiced elegance. Her eyes passed over Ibrahim once, then backtracked. Seat 4A? She hesitated for half a second, then moved in with a soft but firm voice. "Excuse me, sir. We may need to reassign you for operational reasons. Would you be open to moving back to economy?" Ibrahim looked up, expression calm. "Why me?" "There's a passenger with diplomatic urgency," she replied. "We'll compensate you accordingly." "No, thank you," he said, voice even. "I'll remain here." Selina's smile froze. She hadn't expected resistance, not from him. One row behind, Amira pressed her thumb to the edge of her phone. 2 silent clicks. Lens on, mic live. At the far end of the plane, Tyrell Banks, a 24-year-old American travel blogger, adjusted his GoPro chest rig and raised an eyebrow. He hadn't planned to record anything, but something about this moment felt different. The CEO had just stepped in, and the quiet man in 4A wasn't moving. The cabin lights dimmed, the seatbelt signs chimed on, and for a few moments everything felt routine. Until it didn't. Selina Marsh returned to the front galley with a tight smile and tighter breath. She wasn't used to no, especially not from men who wore hoodies and sat alone, especially not when corporate VIPs were waiting. Douglas Harrington had taken his seat in 4B with the air of a man who believed the entire flight had been arranged for him. He didn't even glance at the man beside him. Instead, he unzipped his tablet case and tapped through emails, muttering, "I want to be in the car and at the compound within 20 minutes of landing. I don't care who's waiting." Selina offered him champagne. She didn't offer Ibrahim anything. 4 rows back, Amira Cole didn't blink. Her phone, propped just right under her reading tray, had been recording since the moment Ibrahim had declined to move. Her stylus hovered above her tablet as she scribbled quick notes. Timestamp 811- passenger in 4A offered downgrade. No justification. Passenger refused. No. 2 rows behind Amira. Tyrell Banks wasn't writing anything, he was capturing everything. His GoPro picked up the way Selina only greeted certain passengers. How she made extra eye contact with white couples in rows 3 and 5. How she skipped Ibrahim altogether, twice, during beverage service. Tyrell whispered to himself, "Okay, this feels familiar." He tapped his phone, opened Instagram, drafted a post. "They're icing out this dude in 4A. Would bet real money this gets ugly by landing." Then he hit record on his phone, too. Different angle, different audience. Halfway into the flight, Harrington leaned towards Selina again. "So who's the quiet guy next to me?" Selina hesitated. "Just another passenger. Elysian table. Looked confused when I sat down. I asked him to move," she said, almost proud. He refused. Harrington laughed, low and dry. "Let him enjoy the seat while it lasts." A woman across the aisle raised an eyebrow. She was older, Nigerian, dressed in a smart maroon blouse and reading a French-language novel. She looked at Harrington, then at Ibrahim, then shook her head slowly and said under her breath, "Some people don't know who they're sitting next to." Harrington didn't hear it. But Tyrell did. He grinned. A few moments later, the CEO turned slightly and muttered, not to Ibrahim, but to himself, "At least he's quiet. I've had louder ones." Ibrahim didn't react. He hadn't spoken since boarding, but his presence was now thunderous. Amira's device vibrated. Secure message, incoming. From Gov Media Hub. Live Twitter thread emerging. Footage circulating. Hashtag Seat 4A picking up. Maintain posture. Signal ready. She slid the notification away and glanced toward Tyrell. She didn't know his name, but she knew the angle of that lens. She knew what was happening. The court of public opinion was already assembling. Selina returned once more with a tray of warm towels. She passed Ibrahim's row without pause. Tyrell captured it, replayed it, cropped it, then posted. Western Sky Airlines, Flight 379. They skipped the man in 4A again. No drink, no towel, just silence. And he still hasn't said a word. It took 2 minutes to hit 1,000 retweets. Back in row 6, a teenage girl showed her mom the post. "That's him," she whispered. "The guy right there. He's going viral." By the time the cabin began its descent, people were watching for as if waiting for anything, to break. But Ibrahim sat still. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't call anyone. He didn't even open his mouth. And yet, every camera was already pointed at him, because the man they tried to erase had become the center of the storm, and he hadn't even stood up. The cabin was still in the air, but down on the ground, the noise had already landed. By now, the post from Tyro Banks had reached over 11,000 shares. The clip of Ibrahim being skipped, first for service, then for acknowledgement, was stitched into TikToks, memified on Instagram, and dissected in Twitter threads by diversity consultants, political activists, and flight attendants alike. One post read, "The man they're ignoring in 4A is moving like he's seen this before, like he's not even surprised." Another, "If you ever feel invisible, remember this, man. And remember what came next." Selena Marsh didn't see any of this. She was busy preparing the welcome refreshment for Harrington, a premium bottle of Gruner Veltliner, served with truffle cashews in porcelain ramekins. She smiled at him. He raised his glass. "I hope the government is a bit more cooperative this time," he said with a grin. "We've put a lot of pressure on them behind the scenes." Selena nodded like she understood, like she agreed. Ibrahim sat 3 feet away, still, unmoving, but Amira noticed the change. His fingers had stopped turning the page of his book. He wasn't reading anymore. He was listening. Overhead, a chime announced their approach. "Cabin crew, prepare for landing." And then, it happened. The Nigerian woman in maroon across the aisle stood up, calmly, and walked to the front of the cabin. "Ma'am," Selena called after her, "you need to remain seated." But the woman turned, voice clear. "No, I need to speak." Everyone froze. She pointed toward Ibrahim. "I don't know who he is, but I know what I've seen, and if no one else will say it, I will." A young German man raised his hand nervously. "Are we allowed to talk now?" Amira closed her tablet, sat up straighter. Selena stepped forward, defensive. "This isn't the time or place." But the cabin had shifted. A South African journalist, near the front, unzipped his camera bag and said quietly, "Too late. This became the place, the moment you chose, who mattered and who didn't." Selena's jaw clenched. Harrington stared, unsure whether this was still salvageable. And then came the whisper, from one voice to the next, from row 4 to row 9. "Is someone? Have you seen the hashtag? Theory man. They're saying he..." Tyrell refreshed his feed, blinked, then looked toward Ibrahim's row. He didn't post again. He didn't need to. The cabin was alive now, with something stronger than Wi-Fi. Recognition. Not of name, but of presence. And that, more than any title, was power. The wheels touched down on the red soil of Kudugu with a heavy thud. The runway shimmered under the morning sun. Passengers stirred, stretching limbs, refreshing screens. But something was off. From the windows, people began to notice. Black SUVs lining the tarmac, armed officers standing shoulder to shoulder, a ceremonial guard in full dress. But it wasn't just military. It was pageantry, intentional, organized, unmistakable. And in the center of it all stood a brass podium, flanked by flags and floodlight. Tyrell's heart kicked up a notch. "Yo," he whispered, pulling out his phone. "What the hell is happening out there?" The Nigerian woman from earlier sat forward. "You see the patterns. You know exactly." Row by row, whispers passed like wind, Screens refreshed. News alerts pinged. Amira received a secure signal on her watch. One word lit up in green. Execute. She stood without a word, closed her tablet, walked slowly to the front of the cabin, and nodded to the flight supervisor. It's time. The door clicked. Two heavily armed officers stepped in, boots echoing against the cabin floor. Behind them, a tall man in a beret, medals gleaming across his chest. His voice was deep, deliberate, and final. "Mr. President," he said, stopping at row 4A. "Welcome home." Silence detonated through the cabin. Selena's breath caught in her throat. Harrington dropped his glass. The cabin watched as Ibrahim Traoré, the man in the hoodie, the one they ignored, dismissed, skipped, and whispered about, rose to his feet. Calm, straight-backed, not triumphant, just present. He turned to the Nigerian woman and gave her a single respectful nod, then looked at Tyrell, then at Amira. No words, just understanding. Selena stepped back instinctively. I didn't know," she stammered. He didn't even look at her. Harrington, on the other hand, was already out of his seat, palms up, voice cracking. "Mr. President, this is a miscommunication. If I had known—" A fourth officer stepped in, reading from a formal document. "Douglas Harrington, by order of the Ministry of Commerce and Ethics Oversight, you are to be held for questioning regarding undue influence, defamation of state, and attempted manipulation of policy by coercion. You will be escorted immediately—" "What?" Harrington barked. "You can't detain me. I'm a—" "No," the officer said. "You're a passenger. In our country—" Selena's name was called next. "You are temporarily suspended from international service under aviation ethics law. Your cooperation is expected." Clipped. Cold, non-negotiable. Outside the cabin, the sun rose higher as cameras rolled and a live broadcast carried Ibrahim's return across Africa. Banners read, "Dignity doesn't fly business. It walks with purpose." Hashtags surged. Seat 4A. President unmoved. Dignity in. As Ibrahim stepped off the plane, a crowd erupted into cheers. School children waved hand-painted flags. A national choir began singing. But the president said nothing. Because sometimes, silence was the loudest sound. The footage hit the internet before Ibrahim's shoes touched the tarmac. Clips spliced together from Tyrell's GoPro, Amira's stabilized feed, and dozens of passengers' phones lit up timelines like wildfire. Within 20 minutes, international news tickers updated. President of Burkina Faso disrespected mid-flight, then flips the narrative. The moment the guards saluted him on board, that image went viral. In Paris, headlines rolled. Le Président silencieux. In Lagos, the man who didn't move. In Atlanta, he didn't say a word, and still shut it all down. Back inside the terminal, a press conference had been hastily arranged. Ibrahim walked in slowly, followed by Amira and 2 security officers. There was no red carpet, no grand entrance. Just him in the same hoodie, now flanked by flags. Microphones lit up. He stepped forward. I sat quietly, and the world spoke. He paused. I didn't ask for respect. I expected decency. And that expectation was not met. Not because of what I said, but because of what I looked like. The room was silent. Not a single shutter clicked. He continued. Let this be clear. My experience is not special. It is shared by thousands who never trend, who never get cameras. They are the reason I stayed seated. He stepped back. Thunderous applause followed. But he was already gone. Meanwhile, across social media, new hashtags flooded the discourse. Dignity uninterrupted. President of all of us. You never know who you're moving. At Western Sky headquarters in Berlin, emergency meetings were held. By evening, a formal apology was released, but it landed flat. Selena's name was trending before the ink dried. And Harrington? His scheduled meeting with the Commerce Ministry had been cancelled before he even reached the car. His company's license to operate within the ECOWAS region was suspended, pending ethical review. Back on the streets of Kudugu, a new mural began to form. Local artists painted Ibrahim seated on a plain window, head turned slightly, eyes calm. No title, no suit, just him. Above the mural, one sentence in bold white letters. Respect isn't requested, it's revealed. At a nearby school, students recited his airport speech in morning assembly. Tyrell, now swarmed with interview requests, posted one final video. I didn't know who he was. Didn't need to. I just knew something wasn't right, so I recorded. The truth handled the rest. He signed off with a caption. Henry stayed seated so others could stand taller. That evening, as the world still reeled from what had unfolded, two very different rooms held very different silences. In a brightly lit conference chamber inside the Ministry of Justice, Douglas Harrington sat alone across from three government officials. His hands were cuffed lightly in front of him, not for danger, but for principle. He had tried every line in the book. Business leverage, diplomatic confusion, miscommunication. But the panel remained unmoved. We're not investigating you, the lead official said. We're investigating a pattern, and your arrogance fits perfectly into it. Meanwhile, in a quieter room several floors below, Selena Marsh faced a disciplinary review. She no longer wore her uniform. No badge, no nameplate, just a simple white shirt and silence. When asked why she made the seating request, she said, "I was trying to follow instruction." When asked if she would made the same request to a man in a tailored suit, she hesitated. The chairwoman leaned forward. "You didn't ask for his name. You assumed he didn't matter. That assumption cost you everything." Back at the presidential residence, Ibrahim wasn't celebrating. He was reviewing infrastructure proposals. Pages of highway plans, school budgets, electric grid maps. He paused only when Amira entered with a new batch of press requests and social commentary. "Sir," she said, placing the files down, "you've been invited to address the African Union next month." He nodded. "Schedule it." She lingered for a moment. That moment on the plane was unforgettable. He looked up, then quietly replied, "Because it wasn't just about me." And it wasn't. A teacher in Nairobi wrote a blog post titled, "Teaching Dignity Through Seat 4A." A pastor in Brazil quoted Ibrahim's speech in Sunday sermon. And in a classroom in New Orleans, Tyrell Banks, wearing the same GoPro that had captured the incident, spoke to a group of teenagers who had watched his clip in social studies. "You don't need power to speak up," he told them. "But if you've got the truth, you better not stay quiet either." One student raised her hand. "Did you know who he was?" Tyrell smiled. Didn't matter. And that, perhaps, was the truest ending. This story didn't end because a president revealed his title. It ended because, in a moment of quiet, the world finally listened to what it had refused to see. The world kept flying. Planes took off. People boarded. Gates opened. Seats filled. But for millions, Seat 4A now meant something more. It wasn't just a number on a boarding pass. It was a mirror, a reminder of how quickly we decide who belongs. Based on clothing, accent, skin tone, posture, silence. And how wrong we can be. Some said Ibrahim should have spoken up. Others said he shouldn't have boarded alone. But the truth? He didn't need to say a word. Because sometimes staying seated says everything. The video lived on, not because it was dramatic, but because it was quiet. Because it didn't show a meltdown, a protest, a headline-grabbing confrontation. It showed restraint, dignity, truth. And the world had to look. So now, ask yourself, what would you have done in seat 4B? Would you have watched? Laughed? Stayed silent? Would you have recorded? Would you have spoken? Would you have asked the question no one else dared to? Weigh him? Or would you have sat in stillness, knowing exactly what they'd just done? This wasn't a story about a president. It was a story about power. Not the kind written on passports or stitched onto uniforms, but the kind that walks onto a plane, takes a seat, and refuses to disappear. If you believe that kind of power matters, share this, because dignity shouldn't have to go viral to be seen.